Shalom. This week we are studying the Torah portion of Pinchas, the 8th Torah portion in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, beginning with chapter 25 and verse 10. The parsha starts off with a bang, in a direct continuation of the concluding verses of last week's Torah portion of Balak, chapter 25, verses 1 through 9. When Bilam saw that his cursing mechanism was disabled, and by divine orchestration he kept on defaulting to delivering God's blessings onto the children of Israel, despite his best intentions to curse them, he decided to go for broke. Knowing full well that the God of Israel despises all forms of sexual immorality, Bilam concluded that leading Israel down that path would be the surest way to guarantee their destruction. So, our sages teach, he advised King Balak to launch a program designed to entice the men of Israel into immorality and ultimately to idol worship. The two are very often connected, for they're identical at their spiritual root. This resulted in a certain pandemonium. Many were caught up in the downward spiral of licentious behavior. It was really a bad situation. A plague began to wreak destruction on the people, and in the midst of it all, one of the tribal leaders of Israel, Zimri, son of Salu of the tribe of Shimon, took a Midianite woman and brazenly committed an act with her before the eyes of Moses and the entire nation. Chapter 25 and verse 6 told us that this act was done before the eyes of Moshe and the entire assembly of the children of Israel, and I quote, "They were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting." What was this crying all about? We're taught that Moshe was weeping because he forgot the Torah's rule, which Hashem himself had taught him on Mount Sinai. Namely, that if a Jewish man should cohabitate with a foreign woman, quote, "a zealous person should strike him." That word is kehunah, literally a zealot. Pinchas, grandson of Aaron, the high priest, became this zealot. He arose, stood up, and killed, actually skewered, both the Israelite man and the Midianite woman, and the plague was halted from upon the children of Israel, as the verse states. What's the idea that all of a sudden Moshe forgot this ruling? Moshe forgot a halacha? Some sages express the opinion that the very reason that Moshe, of all people, was suddenly unable to remember this particular halacha was to pave the way for the emergence of Pinchas as a new kind of leader, a part of the generation that would be entering the land without Moshe. Now, many of the Israelites looked upon Pinchas' act as wanton aggression. They criticized him and they accused him of all sorts of things, murder being at the top of the list. But God disagreed strongly with that criticism, and that's why our Torah portion of Pinchas begins with these words of Hashem's own testimony. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron the Kohen, turned back my wrath from upon the children of Israel, when he zealously avenged my vengeance among them, so I did not consume the children of Israel in my vengeance. Therefore say, Behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his offspring after him a covenant of eternal priesthood, because he took vengeance for his God, and he atoned for the children of Israel." What's the meaning of this eternal covenant of peace? Ostensibly, we've seen him commit an act of violence, and he gets rewarded with a covenant of peace. Well, we know that unlike Aaron and his children, Pinchas, Aaron's grandson, did not merit to the priesthood until he slew Zimri and the Midianites. But there's something else. According to Jewish tradition, Pinchas was transformed by God into Elijah the prophet. Same Elijah the prophet who manifests himself as, at least legendarily, as an advocate and help of the people of Israel throughout history. The same Elijah the prophet who attends the circumcision ceremony of each and every Jewish baby boy. In the words of the Targum Yonatan on our portion, Pinchas became an angel, alive and living forever, who will announce the redemption at the end of days. The same Elijah who announces the arrival of Mashiach, the very same. So that halacha which Moshe forgot is called kehunah pogimbo. Zealots strike the offender. What is a zealot? The Hebrew word kehunah is defined as someone who is very pious and committed to his position and will fight for it. As in, there was a movement, a group of people called the Kehunah, at the close of the Second Temple period, who fought zealously for the freedom of Israel and her land. But the word as it's used regarding Pinchas and the words of our verse can easily be misunderstood, for they are easily mistranslated, and the result is deceptive. Let's look at our English rendition of these first verses of our Torah portion again. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the Kohen, turned back my wrath from upon the children of Israel when he zealously avenged my vengeance among them, so I did not consume the children of Israel in my vengeance. Therefore say, Behold, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his offspring after him an eternal covenant of a covenant of eternal priesthood, because he took vengeance for his God and he atoned for the children of Israel. In Hebrew, Hashem said, Bikano et kinati, which the Art Scroll has wisely translated as, he zealously avenged my vengeance. Wisely, because the operative word here, the root of the word kanai, zealot, which means having or showing zeal, the root of it is this word kehunah, which is the same word commonly translated correctly as jealous. So which is it? Zealous or jealous? Zealously jealous? Some Bibles actually translate this phrase that way. This Hebrew word, kehunah, seems to contain both possibilities. So what's the difference between zealous and jealous, other than the fact that one starts with a J and one starts with a Z? Here's what I found attributed to Psychology Today. Jealousy is a word we've all used, rather an emotion most of us have felt at some point in time. Jealous characterizes a person who is overly possessive or envious. Jealousy is a reaction to the threat of losing something, usually someone. This means that when you are feeling jealous, you are often feeling envious as well. Zealous, on the other hand, is a super positive word implying passionate, enthusiasm, and dedication for something or someone. So how we understand Pinchas and his action may well be up to the way we define kinaot. But as we mentioned, Hashem has already made his mind pretty clear. God calls Pinchas a zealot, but his action confused some of his brethren and may continue to do so today. On the one hand, he avenged the vengeance of God. He boldly stepped in and stemmed the tide of desecration. On the other hand, it might appear as if he committed a sin, for he killed a man, the head of one of the tribes of Israel, and that man had not been condemned by any court to death. So the same act of kinaot, do you define the word as jealousy or zealously, vengeful that is? The same word could be explained as positive or negative. Now this is a living Torah of ours, always with a lesson for us, and as the verse in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 17 reminds us, its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. So what is the code of behavior for ourselves that we are supposed to understand from all of this? Things are not always clear, and each beholder to a scene may see something different, depending on the colors he has in his mind. Sometimes a mitzvah, a positive deed, might appear to be an avera, a sin, or vice versa. But there's a solution to that problem right here in the beginning of the parsha, in the verses that we read. The Holy One, blessed be He, himself testifies that Pinchas acted for the sake of heaven. As it states, when he zealously avenged my vengeance. Pinchas got nothing out of this. He had no agenda here. This wasn't about him at all. He wasn't a jealous man out to avenge his own jealousy. His concern was the honor of Hashem, which was being desecrated by the disdain shown for his Torah. So Hashem says, Behold, I give him my covenant of peace, so that no one has any doubts about the true nature of what Pinchas did. Pinchas restored peace. He restored peace between the Jewish people and their Father in heaven. He restored peace to the Jewish people, and for that, he received a personal, eternal covenant of peace. A massive effort was underway here, insidious and wicked, to destroy the very foundation of the nation of Israel by striking at the very foundation of the community, their sexual purity. Now, had Pinchas acted as a result of a different motivation, let's say that he had always hated Zimri and wanted to get him, or had had he wanted to take vengeance against him for some slight, or had Pinchas just wanted to act like a hero and be praised, then that act would have been a sin. But what transformed it to something important and something good, what transformed it and transmuted it to something that shines forever, just as Pinchas himself was transformed, was his totally pure motivation to sanctify the name of heaven. Despite the danger he knew he was placing himself into, some of the people actually wanted to kill him for this. A person's actions can be sometimes understood a number of ways, but it's the inner intention that's the determining factor. Do we act for the sake of heaven, always? Or are we preoccupied with doing things for our own sake? There are a lot of things, even mitzvot, commandments, that we might do the same way, but sometimes it might be considered a mitzvah, and other times it might be considered a sin. Rebuking a person, for example. Are we doing it for heaven's sake or for our own sake? It's a positive commandment to rebuke a person for wrongdoing. As the verse states, Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 17, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall reprove your fellow and do not bear a sin because of him." So if you see someone purposefully committing a transgression, according to this verse, you're supposed to reprimand that person. But what happens if you actually do in fact hate him in your heart, and secretly the reason you're rebuking him is not to help him become a better person, but because you're so excited that you had this opportunity to put him down, because you're so sanctimonious towards him, and now you can belittle him in the name of the Torah. The overwhelming expression that our sages use here is that Pinchas acted for the sake of heaven. The funny thing is that the expression "for heaven's sake" is used as, and I quote, I looked this up, a mild expression of surprise or annoyance. But here we mean it literally as "for the sake of heaven," meaning for the sake of the name of Hashem and His honor. Most times we judge people according to our personal viewpoint without really knowing the truth of what's going on. It's easy to think negatively about someone based on something we've seen, even though it may be that the person's motivation was for the sake of heaven, which would transform that action into something totally positive and praiseworthy. The incident of Yehuda and Tamar, back in the book of Genesis chapter 38, was complicated, and on the surface it appears to be a sin. But Tamar's motivation was totally for the sake of heaven, and was therefore considered an act of righteousness. And the proof is in the pudding, because Mashiach ben David is a result of that union. So go know. By our very nature, we always assume that we know the difference between right and wrong, and we judge others and even rebuke them, and we think that we're helping them out with our observations that we probably convince ourselves are for the sake of heaven. But if we are truly acting for the sake of heaven with purity of heart, proof is our words will be received. But many times we're acting out of our own personal motivation. A lot can be learned from Pinchas, how not to look only at an action itself on the surface level, but to strive to examine its motivation, how important it is to act for the sake of heaven and not out of personal motivation, that it's forbidden to judge people by what we see on the surface level, but we're commanded to judge favorably because we don't know their inner motivations. And the biggest challenge of all is to examine ourselves and ask if we are doing what we're doing, if it's what Hashem desires from us, or because it's in our own interest or the most convenient thing. And this can bring us to true and productive introspection. Pinchas, his whole motivation, his whole action, it was out of love. Pinchas was a lover, not a hater. His severe act was born out of a love for the Jewish people and a desire to safeguard and vouchsafe their purity, just as Elijah the prophet does at every Brit.